Hi there. We think we started with Will's loud typing, so I'm going to start off by yelling at him as I intended to. All right, welcome to Politics for People Who Hate Politics. I'm Lucy Steigerwald. I'm joined by Todd Seavey, writer and ghostwriter of many things, and author of the upcoming/forthcoming Libertarianism for Beginners, which he can plug some more later if he wants to, because we like things like that. We have Will Ricciardella, I think.
Ricciardella, that's good.
Della, damn it, I knew that. Who does the Unbiased American podcast, which is a very trolly name, which I appreciate and I'm also annoyed by in equal measure. Todd's gone. Well, that was a fun run we had. And and we have Camilo Gomez, who writes for the Mitre use. I wish Jordan Bloom were here to say that correctly, because I don't think I'm doing it. But and he also studies philosophy, and he's written for Counterpunch, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. All right. Well, we've immediately lost Todd, so we're going to keep going and hope he finds his way back to us. I don't know. The opening question, which my friend Andrew Carell, who wrote an article for the Daily Beast, he's a senior editor there. He can't join us because he's practicing for a music thing that he's doing. And in the spirit of politics for people who hate politics, that is such a good excuse because music is way better than politics. Politics is garbage. But he wrote a piece where he investigated the question of whether libertarians have any reason, any justification for supporting Bernie Sanders, even a little bit. And I think it's a good question. And I find Bernie Sanders less loathable than many candidates, but it's also an uncomfortable question because the guy's a socialist. He may not be the USSR type, but he is a democratic socialist, and I'm not very comfortable with that. Will, are you comfortable with that?
Well, I don't see much of a difference. If it's communism means that a dictator, usurps your rights without the consent of the governed, and so this concept of democratic socialism means that it's tyranny of the majority, that your rights are usurped because the majority deems it so. I mean, I can go into how Socrates died, and we can talk about that for an hour. But I mean, there's really no difference. You have rights. These are natural rights. They can't be taken by any one individual or government. And there's really, I don't care if it's by a dictator or a majority of people or a minority of people. It's wrong any way you slice it.
Well, that's a lot to go. I mean, in principle, but not in degree, I suppose I agree. I mean, there's still, I'd rather live in Sweden than the USSR, and I think you probably would as well.
Sure, there's degrees. I mean, it's the human condition. The human's conditioned to accept a lot. I mean, look at these are these verities that are put into the Declaration of Independence, that there's only so much we can take until we break, and you have revolution. And this has happened in Latin America quite a bit. In Latin America, what they'll do is they'll have these degrees of dirigisme, these central planning. And what happens is you have incumbent forces that will do the planning, and then you have these opposition forces that say, oh, planning's not working. The opposition starts to beat the incumbency. They move away from planning. Then people complain about markets. Then they move back into planning, and it's just this constant struggle there. And you see this in most places. And if the best standard of livings that you find are generally in countries that have freer markets. And like you said, Sweden has freer markets, and in some cases freer markets than we do here. It's certainly they also have some parasitic elements of their government. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, it's not so socialist to the standpoint where you're going to have constitutional rewrites or these certain types of uprisings, if that makes sense. And I'm sure Camilo can speak, better to those circumstances.
There are interesting things. I will say something. Well, I am still registered as a member of the Socialist Party of Peru, but the curious thing is that since I have joined it, I think I have become more libertarian. And when I talk one thing in the headquarters, I even quoted Rothbard, and it was very fun. I think that people think that I am so anti-system or anti-state that I belong to the left, at least to a certain level. I think that since in Latin America there is no mass libertarian, there are, I think, at least some of the people that are interested in libertarianism are still with the left, but I think that my problem isn't with the word socialism, because I think the socialism of the new left was very interesting. I think that the socialism of left libertarians, of of Carl Hess, of Murray Rothbard, of the left-wing period of Murray Rothbard, or Robert Anton Wilson, was a very interesting period. I think even once I was writing an email to Daniel McCarthy, was the editor of the American Conservative, and he told me that he was very interested in reality in Carl Hess. And I found that there are characters that in the American left are very interesting, but sadly it seems that the American socialists don't like them much, because I think that contrary to them, I mean, there is a very rich tradition of socialism. Even in Norman Thomas, he said that he said last days he was more near anarchism than social democracy. He thinks that bureaucracies were fatal for the workers, were very bad to the centralized government. I think that there could be a strong argument against central planning. I think that Bernie Sanders is not really understanding that a centralized state, even if he wants to be a centralized state for benign purposes, is gonna. I don't think that they are interconnected. That he didn't understand that connection.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely doesn't understand. I mean, that's a whole. There's a lot you just said there, and I agree that the people, we could debate whether certain people who call themselves socialist or anarcho-socialists or all those other terms that make me vaguely uncomfortable, whether they're really a socialist or not. But it's true that what probably Will and I think of as socialists in America tend to be the moldy variety who legitimately make excuses for Mao or Stalin, or I mean, they're not intellectually interesting even. I think you're right about that. They're not interested in those wild card people who, like Rothbard's days flirting with the left, and I think you're right about that, and that speaks to the fact that they're boring, and that socialists and communists in sort of what I think of the classic and awful sense are bad writers, and they're often bad thinkers. But I don't know, that's another end of the pool, I guess.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and the way that people talk about socialism today isn't the way that socialism is traditionally defined, and that is the government owns the mode of production, meaning that there is no private ownership. And when we talk about socialism in the United States, it's not necessarily socialism. You're really talking about degrees of fascism. I mean, how fascists allocated resources. Peter Drucker wrote his landmark piece called Totalitarianism, and in it he concluded that fascism is a stage reached once socialism has proven to be an illusion, meaning that there is no incentive structure for people to create anything in socialism. Mises wrote about this in his treatise on socialism, that without a price structure you can't efficiently allocate resources. So the fascists understood that, hey, we can have these people think that they own these things, give them the illusion that they're owners, but we control them. And their ends is to control things for the state, so that you have people believe in the strong central government. What they create is theirs, but the state really controls it through regulations, in our case antitrust laws, and confiscatory tax rates, and rent seeking, seeking privileges from the government for the government to pick winners and losers. And I think that's there's a lot of people talking past one another when it comes to the traditional definition of socialism compared to what we see it as today via social democracies.
Wow, I found that a weirdly compelling and convincing argument in terms of definitions. I tend to call FDR, for example, a soft fascist, which
he most certainly was more of a hard fascist. Yeah.
I mean, the competition at the time of FDR was rather fierce for fascism, so we're giving him soft, I think, based on.
Well,
just...
by that definition, Woodrow Wilson was worse. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Camilo.
No, but I think both are right. I think that that's precisely the thing that Bernie misses, that FDR was considered a fascist by a portion of the American left and by a portion of American right, but actually, but Norman Thomas, a lot of the socialists of the last century, actually, I think Karl Hess was a member of the American Socialist Party before he joined the Republican Party, and the only thing that he think that was still all his life was his profound hate for FDR.
That's, if you're going for something consistent, I guess you could do worse than a profound hatred of FDR. I think even libertarians are weird about FDR. They kind of give him even a partial pass, or they're too busy hating on Wilson, which is also a fine pursuit. But you got to give FDR his due, because he's the one who, like,
terrible.
You never went back to what it was before. He was kind of the final straw.
Stacked the court. He expanded the powers of the presidency. He was awful.
Yeah, and you know, in turning 120,000 people without charge should be
American citizens, no doubt. Yeah.
Most of them, yeah. That's not really something that you like. That's not just like, well, you know, it was a different time.
And the Supreme Court rubber stamped it too, which is shocking. I mean, here's this entity that everybody thinks is some sort of a constitutional bulwark that protects, protects liberty. It's fascinating to me that people accept this, that the very document that is supposed to restrict the federal government is the final arbiter of those restrictions. I think that's perhaps the stupidest thing I've ever heard ever.
Well, the Supreme Court's gotten it wrong a lot of things. I think they get it wrong on the Fourth Amendment a lot, though. When I was researching and writing about Scalia recently, I actually
write a lot. Yeah.
He was much better on the Fourth Amendment than I would have guessed.
He's an originalist. That's what I am. You take it what the framers had originally meant.
Well, there's some wiggle room in terms of, God didn't pronounce exactly what, each word was intended to mean. It's
not about God, it's about any law that you pass. In order for me to vote for it, it must have some meaning at the time. Otherwise, people wouldn't vote for it. It's like, well, these words could be interpreted another way. Why would I vote for that? Especially when you're talking about 13 colonies that feared, more than anything, a strong central government. They were really concerned about those words at the time. And, as time went on, through Wilson, who wanted to move away from that kind of iteration and wanted to move towards, well, that's too mechanic. We're a living organism.
No, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing worse than strict constitutionalism would be all the other people who want a living constitution, because everyone who advocates for that and uses that term would be much worse. I'm more radical than the Constitution. I at least want to take it back to the Articles of Confederation. But certainly the Constitution, if actually followed as much as possible, would be an improvement over what has happened. But none of this is about Bernie Sanders, and also Todd was eaten by wolves, which is sad.
Well, for back to Bernie Sanders, I think that there is something very interesting, that a lot of people talk about him as an unreconstructed New Dealer more than a socialist, and that's very interesting, because actually I think that the New Deal was very different than the project of Norman Thomas socialism that he was running actually against. The American way of socialism, per se, in some way, it's very different than social democracy. I actually reviewed a book for Dimitri Luz, which was about a book by Jack Ross, which is a very curious guy, because he was originally a member of the Green Party, but then he became a Pat Buchanan supporter and started to write the American Conservative. And I think he's one of the solid anti-war paleoconservative Jews and it is very curious in that strain. That American socialists understand American history in a way much better than a lot of liberals, and they understand that their call of decentralism was not merely rhetoric, because to abuse of its citizens. And I think that's very interesting. I think a lot of times, even I think Gis Walker has brought in about that, a guy in Wisconsin that used to call himself a fiscally conservative socialist, which a guy who ran as a Democrat. And it was very fun because actually, if someone reads about seaward socialists in Wisconsin, they actually were relatively fiscally conservative. They were very interested in efficacy, in be effective in the policies they do. They were much limited in their vision of government than a lot of liberals, and that's something that I never have heard Bernie Sanders say anything about them.
Well, I don't know, like the idea of the fiscally conservative socialist, like my brain is glitching when I try to think about that. I don't even know. I mean, at some point, again, like I'm gonna criticize someone like I don't know, like I adore Sheldon Richman in so many ways, and he changed my thinking on so many things. And I often, him and other people of his ilk, they always call themselves left libertarians. And at the end of the day, they're on my team, and they don't want a state, and they don't want to coerce anybody. But a lot of them have a fondness for the word socialist, and they'll try to troll me and say, well, Sanders Spooner was a libertarian socialist, which apparently is what individualist anarchists of the 19th century sometimes call themselves. But to me, my God, you think capitalism is a term that's been ruined? Socialism has been ruined. I mean, why? I do not understand the desire to rehabilitate the word in any way.
I could say something about the relation of the left and libertarians outside United States is very curious because, for example, Enrique Gersi, which is a well-known Peruvian lawyer, was also sometimes ago some videos of him in the Cato Institute. He's well-known in libertarian circles, I think. Yeah, especially if someone is a little older than us, probably knows him. He once told me that actually a guy, a Peruvian leftist, which actually tried to make a coup d'etat some years ago and was actually captured, had a lot of sympathy for the idea of giving property rights to the community. Because here in Peru, the property rights of the land are actually in great part for the state, and he was more of the idea of giving it to the communities, and it was very strange because he used to say he was also in the Senate, in the Peruvian Senate, and he used to say that he most of the times voted actually with the most left wing of the left wing senators in the 80s, and it was very very funny because I think that is what America doesn't have. I think that there are some heterodox forms of Marxism that actually are more near to anarchism. For example, if someone sees the Zapatistas or the Kurds, they're actually very not much interested in replicate a government. They are more interested in create autonomy in their communities. And it's funny because sometimes more average leftists talk about them, but when it becomes times of elections, they always call for bigger government.
Yeah, that's that reminds me of the anarchists that I went to college with, and they would be the types who call themselves anarchists, and then their compromise is like Barack Obama or actual state socialism, or if you find that redundant, or I just they're not particularly committed to it, and that's why often the radical, like the far left, sometimes they're completely terrifying in their economics. Sometimes they swear to the ends of the earth that, like my one cousin, that they just want a non-coercive community. And a lot of libertarians think no one's gonna say you can't go form your commune down the street. I bet Will isn't gonna say you can't go form your commune down the street. But people like my cousin, who I love dearly, they have this idea that capitalism will eventually come and menace them at the door, and you know, that it's inherently tied to warfare and all this other stuff that I really just don't
I have
buy.
a question for you, actually, Lucy, and it's on anarchy, and it's on this leftist vision of anarchy as like anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-capitalism, and that somehow you can, you know, you can coerce, like, I don't think they take into account people working in their self-interest. Why would I want to be part of somebody's community where they take my stuff? Every individual's self-interested. Why would I go, oh, hey, why don't I just work for you guys to take my things? And then what
Well,
incentive do I have to work anymore?
well, that's why communes tend to collapse pretty
Exactly.
fast.
I just
I've
don't
noticed.
understand
I
how
actually,
it presupposes a state. If you look at any sort of leftist version of anarchy, it will always devolve. I know Nozick always talks about, and even right libertarianism. You're always going to come back to some sort of state. But anarcho-capitalism doesn't presuppose it insofar as anarcho-communism does. You need to have a central entity to coerce other
yeah,
people, otherwise they're just not going to act that way.
Well, that you're jumping a bunch of steps there, I think. I mean, if you have a community of whatever size that people are free to leave, including adolescents, which is another issue altogether, then I mean that's and either it's one where you have some weird ass syndicalism, and I think the incentive structure is gonna
Right.
tend to lead to it's gonna tend to collapse. I
It's going
think
to
there
be
could be
capitalism in the
exceptions.
end. It's just going to lead to capitalism. Everybody working within their own self-interest. If there's no coercive entity to forcibly make them work against
Well,
their own self-interest.
on a very small scale, and you know, goony college student types who have an ideology that I
Yeah.
mustn't work for my self-interest, you can fight against it to an extent. I don't think that works. Obviously, it doesn't work on a state scale or even
Right.
smaller than that
It will work
scale.
on a familial scale at my family, but that provides me utility to feed my kids and take care of my wife. It doesn't provide me utility to take care of my neighbor's kids and my neighbor's wives to the degree
Unless
that it does my own kids and my own wife. I'm not saying that. Certainly the very people in this country are very charitable, and charities existed long before any state help has come along, and I'm not saying that, but I'm saying for it to become perpetual, whereas I'm supporting my neighbor, they're not actually trying to help themselves. It's more so I'm supporting them, where most people don't want to support their kids their whole lives. You see what I
right.
mean? So it's like that's where kind
yeah,
of that would break down. And anarcho-capitalism, even in the smallest sense to the largest sense, I don't think it could ever be viable, but would be far more
but I think
logical.
probably we will see eventually in the near future some more heterodox forms of anarchism, because I think Bill Kaufman is a very interesting writer. I think even he is a very heterodox. I think despite he identifies himself as a paleo conservative, I think he probably have more left wing fans. I think he is very interested in Dorothy Day, and Dorothy Day is someone religious. I think you could call her a Catholic anarchist. And while he wasn't an anarcho-communist, she believed in the importance of mutual aid, for example. And I think it was like I think it's gonna be very interesting and very heterodox forms of a pro-life anarcho Kropotkin anarchist commune. It's gonna be. I think that there are a lot of that examples. But I think something that sometimes is very, and I know a friend of Lucy that I just forgot his name. Works at the Charles Koch Foundation, which is very interested in monarchism and in the especially in Tolkien. And he has sometimes he writes about anarcho monarchism, and I think even if it sometimes sounds funny as a term, I think that in some places if people try to better than create in some name a small republic when in reality they only leave one person there, if they try to create this their own anarchies of one person, anarcho monarchies, and declare themselves the queens or the kings, it's gonna be very interesting. I think that there is a curious case in the Bolivian jungle actually.
Right.
It could be a very revolutionary case.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
there's nothing stopping these types of experiments. Well, there is occasionally. I mean, these types of experiments do come and hit against the state, or rather vice versa a lot of the time. I do suspect, I'm with the left libertarians in that I think more experimentation is fine and good, and people, if there was less state getting in their way, might try them. But I am on the side of Will that says the type of commune that does go against the sort of natural free market self-interested thing is gonna crumble. I mean, we did see that over the 20th century and the 19th century, actually, though a lot of the 19th century groups were weirder and were like no sex, weird cults and stuff.
I don't know. I don't know if, for example, the Spanish Revolution would have gone in the other way if it would have been anarcho-communist, because there is actually an interesting book about the anarcho-individualism of the Spanish Civil War. Apparently, there were at least a small group that has read Alexander Spoon and another anarcho-individual.
Oh, that's cool. I'd like to read that. Yeah.
So there probably would have been more diverse than people sometimes will think. I guess that the limits of our understanding of both the Zapatista community and the Kurdish communities are that because there are basically in war, the Kurds with the Turkish government, and then with ISIS, and the Zapatistas with basically the cartel. So they have it's very complex to access to that community. They have a friend which they made a semester abroad in Mexico, and he has to pass for a lot of clearance before to enter to the Zapatista community. So I think it's very difficult to see real and to really understand these anarchist projects or near anarchist projects because of the danger in that projects are being developed.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said after danger?
Because these projects are in danger. The Kurdish are fighting against ISIS, and the Zapatistas
Right.
are fighting against the cartel. So we didn't. I think it's difficult for us to see really inside that organizations, because that organizations wants to have some security and don't show how this works because it could be used by their enemy.
That's that's interesting. I don't have anything to argue against so much with that. God, I had a point. We keep dancing away from Bernie Sanders in the U.S. election. We're actually getting much more intellectual than that, which was not my intention. This is not the show for deep philosophy and things like that.
Yeah.
It tends to be the being annoyed by topical things or finding some excuse to talk about space aliens show.
But I think in some ways the funny thing is that people tend to think that America is the place of free markets when in reality, if someone read any libertarian website will know that it's not the case. And
Right.
sometimes there are some journalists that try to portray that Bernie Sanders is a threat to free markets, when I think that he's not more threat in reality than I think Hillary Clinton. I think that
well, that's an interesting thing to mull over.
Well, I agree with that. I think they're both the same. But
well, I mean, I think Hillary Clinton is almost a right winger, though. Except for the gun and the abortion thing, and the fact that Clintons are hated by the right. I don't get why she's not more accepted. She's very Nixon-ish, honestly, in a lot of ways.
Yes, she's
So
actually one of. Yeah, I think she is actually the more Nixonian of the Democratic presidential candidates ever, and
I think Trump is the Nixon candidate myself.
I'm gonna need you both to vote. Will, why do you say that?
Well, he has Nixon. I mean, I think he has a high-level Nixon person that's working on his campaign. I feel that he's more of the Nixonian candidate. I think Hillary's moved. And when I talk about the left, I'm talking about an economic components.
Look, you kept putting anarcho-capitalism into the left, which was makes a lot of people all over cringe horribly, which I appreciate.
No, there are leftist ideals within anarcho-capitalism. Absolutely, if you look at from a moral standpoint. If I look at it from a conservative, the reason I support markets is not due to my ideology, but philosophically speaking, dealing with metaphysics, final causes, individual purpose, and so on, teleological arguments that we shouldn't discuss on the show.
Dumb it down.
Yeah, but that I'm sure Camilo would
I actually agree with William.
I'm sorry?
I actually agree with William on that. I actually agree with you because a lot of, for example, the Conkians, the followers of Sect 3, of Samuel Edward Conkin, actually they, despite calling themselves anarcho-capitalists, are very much on the left. I think in some ways they are more in the left than probably the people on the C4SS. They actually call for a revolution even in violent terms. And I think, yes, they call themselves anarcho-capitalists, but I think they have few things in common, even with Todd Seavey, I think.
Poor Todd. Never listening to Will again because he got permabanned thanks to Will's genius advice. Way to go, Will.
Yeah, I think that Bernie, I think that Bernie is, well, in foreign policy, despite don't be as good as Ron Paul is, he could have made Hillary have a tough time, because Hillary is the most neoconish candidate of the Democratic Party probably in his history. I probably think that if Sue Jackson was near to her level of neoconservatism, but no, in the present Democratic Party, I don't think in someone as hawkish as her.
Yeah, she's pretty terrible in in terms of what liberals supposedly value, but secretly a lot of people, it comes down to abortion rights and gun control, especially the former, and they're really willing to accept some mediocre candidates who don't even follow their professed ideals. And that's why the moderate left is so. But it's easy to have contempt for them. I hope none of my liberal relatives ever watch this, but like, there's just, I don't know. But then, the moderate right does the same thing. They sell out small government ideals every damn day.
They don't care about small government. Don't let them fool you.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is really bad, which, we could easily have us bring it back to the election, which is, my God, is there anyone left with a modicum of non-awfulness? And I'm curious what Will say. I'm sure it's something wrong, but
you said yourself you looked into Scalia's record on it was the opposite of what you thought on
Fourth
search and
Amendment,
seizure, right?
yeah.
I mean, this is what originalism is. It follows its principles. It's not about people. So I follow constitutional principles. I'd consider myself a Madisonian. I'm not a Hamiltonian Federalist. I'm more along the lines of, if I had to, it would be Adams, Madison, and Jefferson. I appreciate the Anti-Federalists, Thomas Paine, Patrick Henry, the brilliant arguments, George Mason more specifically. So I'm kind of along the lines of those classical liberal principles, and I do not deviate from them. Scalia rarely deviated from them. I don't agree with all of his decisions, but sometimes those are for political reasons. He would agree with the decision in order to ensure that he wrote the majority opinion, to lessen the blow of however far they deviate. But, I mean, Ted Cruz and Rand Paul were two of my favorite because they followed the same principles, same constitutional principles. They were derived from the same place. And I thought that gave us the best hope. One ran a better campaign than the other, and that's essentially what it came down to.
Yeah, well, but one deviated more but got away with it, which maybe is the same thing as saying ran a better campaign, and that is Ted Cruz.
I disagree. I think Rand, I don't disagree with either one on everything, but they're really both constitutionally centered, and they're very principled, both of them. It was literally just came down to Rand's positioning and Rand's messaging and his tactics in the beginning, dealing with somebody like Donald Trump. He should have waited as opposed to going after him right away. And I think he definitely could have been one of the front runners, in my opinion.
I think that probably Ron Paul could have done it better, I think.
Rand?
Ron Paul, because I think his radicalism was, I think as Justin Raimondo says, his radicalism is pragmatic. I think people was anger, and he was more anti-establishment. The only one that could be more anti-establishment than Trump is Ron Paul, I think.
But I mean, Ron Paul wasn't elected, and Ron Paul didn't expect to be elected, whereas Rand Paul was trying, I think, actually. He may have been softening the ground for 2020 or something like that, but he intended to be more successful than he ended up being. Ron Paul was, let's just do this and let's yell awesomely about anti-war stuff and the Fed and be a precious old flailing man whom we love so dearly.
Actually, revisiting the history of the Libertarian Party, I think that actually the 80s when the Koch was the vice presidential candidate, I think it was almost their most libertarian, the time where they're
in 1988
more votes. And in 80, I think in 80. Well,
wasn't that Clark? Was that Koch and
yes?
No.
Well,
Clark.
Well, it is pretty funny because in the one hand he called himself a low tax liberal, but at the same time his proposals were very for abolish the FBI, abolish the CIA, abolish a lot of federal agencies, and I think it was very interesting. I think. I wonder what could have been of the Libertarian Party if the Koch brothers were still supporting it, because I think sometimes they still have interesting candidates. I think that Sean Ho in North Carolina was an interesting candidate. I even write about him in a Peruvian journal, which is not very usual for third party candidates in the United States to get covered international. So I guess he was.
Well, they hardly get coverage here, which is part of the problem. And we, libertarians, you can be a big L libertarian and a small L, and most people I know are much more on the small L side because the poor party, I don't know, there's lots of shenanigans and weird infighting and schisms that happened before I was born, and they never got their momentum back. Even though Gary Johnson, I mean, did much better than anybody since Clark, I guess, in 80, but that means getting a million votes, which is not enough, guys.
Yes, but I think that the question is, what's the future for libertarians? Because I think if Trump is nominated, I don't know what a lot of libertarians will do. I mean, that goes to the beginning of the question: will libertarians vote for Bernie Sanders? I guess that some will. I guess that some will back Trump. I guess that some will vote for Gary Johnson. I guess that there were people that just gonna stay in their home.
Yeah, I mean, when I didn't get how many young people had actually gone over to Sanders, and well, he's probably the new Ron Paul in that he's not going to get anywhere. He's not the new Barack Obama. He's not going to be president. But I was reading something about his devoted college student fans, and suddenly something clicked in my brain, and I was like, I feel like I could finally see how the Ron Paul fans went to Sanders, the younger ones especially, to Trump, weirdly, the sort of...
I don't get it. I don't get it. Can you explain that to me?
I'm trying to, it made perfect sense. I mean, I'm not saying it's good or that it's, a consistent principle, but it's, a shattering of principle and of priorities that these people who would tend to support Ron Paul take. I mean, the Donald Trump is the anti-immigrant angle, and there's whispers of the anti-war thing, but it's dumbed down. It's about annoying the establishment, and Sanders is saying, you college students got screwed by various things, including banks.
Government.
Well, yeah, no, but it's close. If you don't get it, you college students got screwed by Goldman Sachs and big banks. Sounds a lot like the bailout was stupid, and the Fed and the housing bubble. If you don't really know, but you're like, yes, I was screwed, and I'm.
Right.
I don't know. It just.
definitely about anger. That's definitely what it is mostly about, is anger.
And a lot of it's legitimate anger. It's just
No, it's all legitimate anger.
Yeah.
It's just they're just misplacing it in the wrong. It's like, government screwed you. Vote for me for more government to fix it. Wait,
well,
what?
my God, yes, that's a rule of that predates Sanders by a couple of centuries.
No, the funny thing is for example, the Fed, that was supposedly a big topic of the Ron Paul campaign, because he was for ending the Fed, and actually it's not only a right-wing idea. Actually, Cindy Sheehan, which ran as an independent, I think, in 2008 against Pelosi, actually won a party, and so I think Bernie should rethink his economic ideas. I don't know what to say.
I've heard the end the Fed thing. I didn't know that about Sheehan. I ran into her at G20 when I was trying to escape riot cops who invaded my neighborhood. Good times. I was not protesting, Will, but I was merely observing. I promise. I would never be such a hippie. Yeah, I would, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
No, yes, but occasionally the Fed thing. You know, when Ron Paul was actually running, like, all the other GOP people would pay lip service to this, and as soon as he was gone, that concept was gone. That's kind of how you can see that Paul's influenced the conversation, but they need to be there. Otherwise, everyone conveniently forgets about the issues they raised. Even with Rand Paul, the debate he wasn't at before the one where he came back, that debate, it was the most hawkish, and it was nobody was defending the Fourth Amendment, not Cruz, who's sometimes is okay on it. I don't know. It's like all Pauls are there to make the conversation slightly less appalling, and that's.
But yeah, it's just like, I mean, I despise the Fed, but it's just rational ignorance amongst the body politic. Nobody cares enough. A lot of people don't know how the Fed works, what it does. I mean, we're the most interested voters. We know what we don't like. I know I don't like the Fed. I'm an economist. You know what I mean? I have to know what the Fed does. But the average people on the street aren't thinking, geez, the Fed is really only responsible for providing liquidity in the case of a run. It's not really supposed to be setting nominal interest rates and influencing real interest rates and, perpetuating the misallocation of resources. And no one, if you ask anyone on the street, 10 out of 10 people aren't going to know what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, and I think that people have an obligation to really understand, but they're busy, It sucks, but it's true.
It's understandable.
But I think that goes.
Is he breaking up on your end?
Yeah, a little bit.
Someone in Facebook put that actually the thing that Ron Paul and Bernie were different was that actually Ron Paul, when he was in the campus, he told the students that they should read about economics, and Bernie will never do that. And I think that's probably the biggest rule about the campaign.
Well, it's the last thing Bernie wants his supporters to learn about is economics. Let's be honest.
My thing, though, I'm gonna admit now that, like, I don't understand as much economics as I wish I did. I've read stuff, and I know, but I'm not quite as able to talk about it with confidence as a lot of people I know. Not as much as you two, not as much as a lot of my friends. And I would argue that to be a libertarian or small government, you don't need to understand it, deeply. You just need to understand some basic laws, some basic understanding about.
I agree.
Concepts of central planning and how central planning fails horribly, and how the knowledge problem. You need the knowledge problem. You need to understand. Nice bonuses like prices actually mattering and not being just like a random.
You know more than 90% of people already just by that comment.
Yeah.
Literally, I'm not kidding.
Well, that's probably bad.
No, I mean, that's it. It's just how do you allocate scarce resources with alternative uses if it's not bottom up, if it's not, people deciding how they value it, and that they flow through prices to where it's most valued, and you get less waste. This way you get a higher standard of living. It is, you think it would be simple. There's a lot of minutia in there, but I mean, yeah, these are basic principles.
Yeah.
That we all react to incentives. We do that every day. You know, you can apply these laws and these principles or verities to your everyday life, to your dating life, to the choices you make, you know, and how you're going to spend your time and opportunity costs. And I just don't think people necessarily think to apply it to an economic situation. It's more on emotion. It's more like, that guy's rich. He had a leg up on me. He's robbed me. You know what I mean? That's such an easier, more salient message than, oh, you know, he's produced something. He's actually serving his common man, and you're like, oh, screw him. He's got a much better car than me. You know?
Well, I mean, it's all diluted by cronyism, by the fact that a lot of business people, unfortunately, really do not want to earn their. They want the leg up, but I mean, the problem is the government is there to offer it.
That's right.
I mean, or at least that's the fatal flaw. You know, that's the bigger problem.
Maybe Camilo can correct me if I'm wrong, but people always bring that up, and I say, look, don't blame the business person for trying to get a leg up and to perpetuate his business. You know, and he goes to government, and government gives him the, you know, hands out and doles out all these privileges and favors. Blame the government. You know what I mean? Because capitalism is not pro-business. Capitalism is free enterprise, and businesses come and go. That's how resources are allocated. That's the reality of it. You know, but I don't, you know, I bring that up all the time, and people are like, well, you know, the business people really shouldn't do that. No kidding, they shouldn't do it. But it's really up to government to not do it. They're our trustees. They're our delegates, not the business person.
Damn, I can't disagree with that at all myself.
Well, I think it's a strong argument, but I think that the burning campaign in a lot of ways is more than about economics. I think that it's about a generation of the left that some people think that was defeated, I think. Because when people used to think in third parties, they consider themselves as a marginal staff or something like that. And actually, Bernie was a member of the Liberty Union Party that was actually a party that, a very small and bizarre small party. And actually, I think Gis Walker could talk better than I about smaller parties of the left, because some are very curious and very strange and very bizarre. There were some Trotsky. Well, in United States there are a lot of Trotsky organizations, including some of which some neocons were formerly members. So
yeah, neocons are that whole thing. I still don't quite grasp how Trotskyites turned into neocons, but that's the rumor.
Yeah, that's where the term came from. Neoconservatives is literally coming from, yeah, that Marxist movement into, you know, this conservative movement, which is not conservatism really, or broadly defined. It is. Hillary Clinton has the same viewpoint on, you know, on foreign policy as, say, contemporary neoconservatives, whereas that has never been neoconservative foreign policy. The democracy building project is not conservative foreign policy. There's just I don't know how to say it in how many different ways.
Jesus Christ, thank you. I mean, I'm glad that you're saying that.
It was not Reagan's policy. Reagan did not invade countries. Reagan did try to build democracies in places. It is not conservative foreign policy. Rubio's conception of what foreign policy should be, going into Libya, into Syria, you know, that is not conservative foreign policy. So that tends to get construed, and people drown out certainly neocons, because neocons agree with it, and then you have that huge wing of the Democrat Party that tends to have that neocon foreign policy, and they drown out actual conservative voices by calling them purists, or what John McCain called Rand Paul and Ted Cruz cuckoo birds, and wacko birds, or whatever the hell he calls them. So that's kind of, that drowns out these kind of rational right, you know, further right voices where they can't, you know, Ron Paul kind of smashed through. His conception wasn't conservative foreign policy either, granted, but some of it was, and he just broke down the walls, as opposed to, you know, bringing forth an argument that you know, more people were willing to accept.
Yeah, I mean, he was, as I say, he was there to be philosophical and to say some really awesome, to me, things in front of a very large audience, and anyone who argues that's not worthwhile, I think is
and Lindsey Graham did the same thing. I think Lindsey Graham, when he went into the campaign, went in to say, I just want to make sure Rand Paul doesn't win. I think that's what that idiot said when he went in there. And then all he did was talk about how he was going to, you know, go into Syria. We got to go into Syria. There is ISIS, and you know, and just say the most embarrassing things. It makes, as a conservative, I'm watching it, I'm more livid then I don't like the GOP. I like the Democrats. I actually admire the Democrats more than I admire the GOP. At least they fight for what they stand up for.
Well, then they'll roll over pretty quickly, but
I mean, they've done a far better job at fighting at it. It's like they don't make apologies. You know.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about them is that their supposed beliefs, they roll over on most of them, and they stick with a couple of them, and they do stick with the couple that they stick with. It's true. They don't actually have anti-war as like a standard of them.
But on the market, they stick to it. On the market, they stick to what they believe, and it's this 1% are bad. People that make money are bad. Capitalism, essentially what they're saying, capitalism is bad. I'm a capitalist, but it sucks. Okay, what?
Right. There's a lot of I'm a capitalist, but it sucks that I get from a lot of corners. That's
well,
a
life
summation.
Sucks. You know, what do you?
I mean,
I'm not rich.
There's again, I was gonna say this before with like we have work to do to answer the concerns when there is the cronyism and stuff, but there is this purity of like that guy has more money and I'm mad, and that's how you get estate taxes and things where you basically say you can't pass your money down without being punished for it. You can't do all this other stuff without being punished for it. And of course, the inability to understand that, say, a CEO should make more money than the janitor because the CEO, assuming he started the company, put up capital and risked something to make, he didn't, I mean, we know this, and people who don't understand basic things like someone risked something to get this company going, and they continue to risk money to get more money, and that means they should get money.
Well, I always tell those people when they say that the CEO makes more than the janitor, and I always say, do you have a 401k? Do you have a pension? Oh yeah, I said, well, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and make sure that have the janitor run your pension or your 401k and have them invest it for you if you think that if that's really what you want. Oh no, and I said, well then get rid of the CEO, the person who manages it now, who gets paid to manage your pension from whatever company where it is. Get rid of them and put the janitor in there, and all of a sudden, well, that's not what I meant.
It's almost as if there's some skills involved with
it's like, oh, that's not what I mean. I go, well, what do you mean then?
Well, there's this whole belief in the labor theory of value without saying as much. It's if you work really hard, whatever that is, maybe 8 hours a day, and I'm not saying the janitor isn't working hard, but the skills are low. It's true. And then you deserve it, just because you do. I
agree. And I always say, you don't have to pay these people as much. Offer your lawyer just as much as you offer your CPA or the person who paints your home or your plumber. Put your money where your mouth is and see what happens. It's just not going to work in reality, and you can't force the government to do it. If the government's going to force a lawyer to make what a plumber does, you're going to have a lot less lawyers. It takes about 5 minutes to figure that out, and it's just all demagoguery and populism, and I hate this guy and anger, and that's what we're getting in this campaign is Bernie Sanders populism and Donald Trump populism, and that's what you're going to get. A lot of this is fantastic. This is tremendous. What the hell is this?
I think there is an interesting point made some days ago in an article. I don't remember who wrote it, but that Bernie was smart enough to not attack the Donald Trump supporters because he wanted them, and he was more smart than Hillary. And well, Hillary probably knows that it's very difficult that Trump supporters could jump to her, but it's more probably that some Trump supporters could jump to him.
Well, Trump he's sort of a protectionist weirdo, and Sanders has protectionist, of course, and he also said open borders is a Koch brothers plot, and obviously Donald Trump being anti-immigrant, that's gotten him his momentum. So there's some weird overlap that you don't even want to think about. Sanders, personally, he's harder to hate, if only because he doesn't have the slick politician vibe, and he's just a ridiculous Larry Sanders.
Larry David?
Larry David, thank you, yes. There's something, I actually have to go write a thing about, I'm doing my Playboy series where I talk about how every politician is the worst, every candidate, rather, and I have to do Sanders now. And I haven't had enough fodder for insulting him because I can't really play up free market economics that much because the audience just isn't the same, sadly. So I got to find other ways to hate on Sanders. We have to wrap up, this conversation, in spite of our the disastrousness of losing all our guests, poor sweet Todd, Andrew Carell wrote the article, but this trio worked much better than I would ever have anticipated, which is very strange. So, we're quickly, if we can, first, tell me who scares you the most, if you can pick one. And I can't, of the candidates, honestly, because it's so hard to decide. But I'm curious if you guys have a candidate that you really find particularly alarming with the U.S. election.
I think that Trump.
Trump scares you the most?
More, but I think that yes, in some ways. I think. I guess that. Well, I think that, to be honest, even in Latin America, there are very nativist impulses. That here in Peru, there are people that don't want Colombians to immigrate.
Right.
So, yes, I understand that some people could be angry because of immigration, but I think he could go in a very dramatic direction that could affect the United States. I think, for example, in my university, actually, some professors from the Virginia Tech and other universities are coming to recruit students to go to their PhD programs, especially in hard science, in mathematics especially. And I think that even some Republicans now talk about that they want to cut student visas, and I think that could really affect the United States in innovation, in technology. They could affect more than they could think.
Yeah, certainly. Will, what about you? Do you have
I'm kind of like you. That's really hard to say. I don't know. I mean, I think it would be a disaster if Bernie Sanders was elected for markets, for liberty. I just think but I can't say that I don't think the same about Hillary Clinton. And
right?
to a degree, markets wouldn't. If Trump sticks to his tax proposal, the market won't be as bad as, and especially as it's scored. Me looking at it, isn't as bad as Hillary or Bernie. But the protectionism in it is outrageous.
Yeah.
And it's the lesser of the three evils if I look at the tax plan. So I don't know. I mean, anyone on the Democrat side at this point, not to say that Bush is terrible. It's just really hard to put. But I'd rather have, if I had to pick somebody, I don't know. I'm with you, Lucy. I don't.
Well, good. Not picking somebody. Picking somebody. I can't even pick someone you hate the most. That's how bad it is.
I don't even hate Sanders. I don't hate him. I think he's a nice guy.
He's kind of adorable and is sad.
Yeah, I don't hate Trump either. I'm from New York. I like, he makes me laugh sometimes. It's just that they're dangerous.
Well, I love when he insults Dick Cheney and goes after people that I think deserve it wholeheartedly. But then he alarms me 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
All right, we usually do the what you were enjoying the last fortnight that had nothing to do with politics thing, and we got to do that fast too.
All right.
So Will, tell us something you've enjoyed that is not about politics last
something other than
few weeks.
politics. That's a really good question too. I've enjoyed food. I like
Okay.
food. And
That's pretty baseline, but we'll allow it.
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know. I just eat in between doing political stuff and writing, and then I'm like, this is such a good meal right now. And then right back to what I do.
Fair enough. All right. And Camilo, what about you? Something not politics.
Well, I watched last week Deadpool, and I think it was an amazing movie.
Oh, it was good.
Yes.
It was good.
I might see that this weekend along with The Revenant. I'm not sure. I hope so.
I saw The Revenant too. That was all right. It really is pain porn if you were to watch it. It's just about.
That's kind of the rumor, and I feel like both of them. It's going to be like, it's like I might go see them together at a drive-in, which is very retro of me.
Right.
And it's going to be like 4 hours of just gratuitous violence.
It is.
Which
it really is.
I can do it. I mean, if I have to cover my eyes, I will. But I think I can handle it. And speaking of gratuitous violence, I'm having trouble not playing Fallout New Vegas because I would like to play it instead of doing my work, but no one will pay me to play it because...
I'm glad I never got into it because I'd get addicted to it too.
Yeah, it's the video games are dangerous, which is something I only recently realized after taking a decade break from them. The Fallouts, man, they got me. They got me good.
Did you ever play Assassin's Creed yet?
No, I'm so green to any game made in the last, after GoldenEye or Mario Kart 64. Like that's when I stalled out.
Yeah, GoldenEye, great game though. Now I want to play it. Thanks a lot, Lucy.
I was so bad at that. Oh my god, we would play it after homeschool group, and I would suck at it. But Smash Brothers also.
That's great. That is a great game.
Man, yeah, that's a whole other thing. All right, we have to wrap up. I will promote myself, and then, well, here. All right, look at antiwar.com. It's kind of hard to find the Playboy writings I've been doing, but they're on my Twitter, Lucy Stagg. So if you want to read them, that's where you can find them. Anti-war, I might be taking a break this week because I have to insult lots of candidates. Alternate Tuesdays, there's the podcast with Sheldon Richmond, Free Association, and alternate Thursdays, there's this. And hopefully we'll do a weird politics of the X-Files special soon. And that's about it. Lots to promote. And Will, what about you? Promote some stuff.
You can follow me at unbiasedamerica.com. I have a ton of content on there. Unbiased America Facebook page. I have under Unbiased America at Liberty.me. There's a bunch of my writing there. And I have a Will Ricciardella Facebook page, a fan page that you can follow, and sometimes I'll repost some of my stuff or just put some daily musings or random thoughts on the passing scene on my page. Thank you.
All right. Camilo, promote some stuff. Where can people read you?
I write in the Major Losers, the only place that I write now. So
okay.
There's...
I feel like, God, why would Jordan Bloom name his blog that? Like, no one knows what that is.
No.
He's the fanciest man. He can't help it. Well, you should go and read that, people. The Mitri. I can't say it. I'm sorry. It doesn't work. And poor Todd Seavey. Go read his blog because Todd Seavey is good. And Andrew Carell, who was going to be here, but he had to do musical things. He's a senior editor at the Daily Beast, and he's worth reading. And he has a musical career. He's on Bandcamp. So just go look at all the good libertarians. Good people. I will promote them all. As I say, this was a much it's not to be backhanded with my compliments, but this worked out much better than I thought it would. But it really did. It's a weird mixture of people, but it was good and it was brainier than it was going to be.
We should do a show where we talk about cops and then we yell at each other.
Oh man, that would get loud. Yeah, that'd be real bad. Yeah, we'll yell again. I'm disturbed by how much I agree with Will, though not on originalism, but certainly his tendencies are better than the world's, so that's good.
Yeah, that's the best thing you've ever said to me, Lucy. Thank you.
That is so true. It is.
My tendencies are better than the world's.
And Camilo, it was good to get you back again and have you be all Jesse Walker-esque in your obscure knowledge of everything ever. So, audience, if there was one out there and is one later, thanks for joining us. People watching later on YouTube, thanks everybody. We got to wrap this thing up, but it's been real, and we'll see you next time on Politics for People Who Hate Politics. And man, do we hate it. Okay, goodbye.